Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into pressed uniforms and standing in front of a foggy mirror under flickering fluorescent lights. Your face is freshly washed, your boots are regulation shined, and your mustache, well, it's exactly 1/4 inch beyond the edge of your upper lip. Or is it? You squint. Is that 0.26 inches? You tug at a whisker. You feel like a criminal. Because in the US Army, your face isn't really yours. It belongs to the manual. You're not just trimming facial hair. You're navigating a labyrinth of bureaucracy so dense it might make a Pentagon analyst weep. Your mustache has become a symbol, not of rebellion or rugged charm, but of compliance, power, legacy, and control. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far these sleepy stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start with a clipboard in one hand and a laminated copy of AR 670-1 in the other. That's Army Regulation 670-1, if you're not yet initiated, the grooming doctrine. It's been around in some form since the mid-20th century, and it reads like someone asked, "How can we make facial hair into a legal puzzle?" You scroll down past sections on fingernails and boots, until you land on the crown jewel, the mustache clause. It's a paragraph of pure intensity. Your mustache, the Army says, must not present a chopped off or bushy appearance. It cannot extend below the lip line. And crucially, it may not pass beyond the corners of the mouth in a horizontal direction. There's no exact measurement, but you feel like there's a tape measure in every sergeant's pocket. You imagine a military tribunal debating whether a whisker curling 0.5 millimeter to the left is horizontal or unruly. That might sound silly, but real careers have been impacted by less. One former soldier tells of having his promotion delayed because his mustache distracted from unit cohesion. You think of trying to explain that to your civilian friends. Yeah, I would have made sergeant, but my face was too exciting. And yet, this is serious business. The Army doesn't just love uniformity, it worships it. The logic goes like this: if every soldier looks the same, discipline follows. No distractions. No confusion. No renegades. A perfect line of identical faces ready to receive orders. And your mustache, quirky, expressive, inherently personal, is a threat to that symmetry. Historians still argue whether this obsession came directly from post-Civil War professionalization or if it was born in the World Wars, when massive conscripted forces had to be molded quickly into one indistinguishable machine. What we do know is that by the 1970s, the military had gone full Orwellian on grooming standards. And oddly, the mustache is the only facial hair you're allowed. Beards? Off limits. Goatees? Forbidden. Soul patch? You'll patch your soul in the brig, buddy. Only the lonely mustache remains, a kind of sanctioned rebellion, permitted only because it can be contained. But even then, the mustache has to be neatly trimmed, tapered, and tidy. There's that lovely military trifecta of adjectives. You imagine a committee somewhere arguing over the difference between tapered and tidy. Was the right angle too sharp? Did the hairs at the corner curl suggestively? Better send it up the chain of command. And here's where it gets weird. The Army doesn't want to ban mustaches altogether. In fact, it treats them with the kind of passive-aggressive tolerance usually reserved for in-laws. There's even an unspoken cultural niche. Mustaches are acceptable, if you're high enough rank. If you're a colonel? Mustache away, good sir. If you're a private with peach fuzz? Better wipe that lip clean before formation. It's the strange power dynamic of military grooming. Your face becomes a mirror for your status. A general with a mustache is commanding. A private with the same mustache is insubordinate. It's not about hair. It's about hierarchy. There's also a deep, often unspoken belief that mustaches exude authority. It's no coincidence that most drill sergeants seem to sprout facial hair like it's part of the uniform. And yet, the line between Respectable facial hair. An unprofessional disaster is a razor-thin one. Literally. You're reminded of a fringe tidbit from World War II. During training, some units made soldiers shave their mustaches before parachute jumps, citing concerns about gas mask seals. That's right, someone did a study on how upper lip hair could cause your respirator to malfunction mid-drop. Imagine dying not from bullets, but from an errant whisker breach. And that kind of paranoia still lingers. Today, special units can require completely clean-shaven faces, not just for hygiene, but for equipment fit. Some branches have even flirted with biometric facial recognition tech, and yes, mustaches confuse the scanners. You can't make this stuff up. Meanwhile, soldiers trade secret grooming techniques like classified intel. You hear about one guy who swore by eyebrow scissors to trim his stache with surgical precision. Another used a plastic stencil from a Halloween costume. One sergeant shaped his daily with a dental floss pick. You wonder if there's a black market Etsy store selling regulation-measured mustache guides. And always, looming in the background, is the dreaded surprise inspection. One whisker out of place, and you're doing push-ups in front of a guy with an eagle on his chest and a suspiciously immaculate mustache of his own. So, yeah? You're in the army now, and you've got orders for your upper lip. Comply or clip. Blend or buzz. And when in doubt, shave it out. You're ducking behind a sandbag wall now, heart pounding, uniform clinging to your skin, the air heavy with cordite and sweat. It's World War I, and while bullets fly and mortars rumble in the distance, something strange persists amidst the madness: mustaches. Glorious, bristly, sometimes ridiculous mustaches. You glance around the trench, and it's like a catalogue of lip-hair bravado: handlebars, chevrons, pencil thins, even the odd walrus. Because here, in the chaos of the Western Front, a man's mustache isn't just tolerated, it's expected. You adjust your steel helmet, and try not to stare at the corporal next to you, whose mustache could honestly snag barbed wire if he leaned in too close. There's dirt on his cheek and a faint smile under the curl of his lip hairs. You wonder if he oils it, or if he just lets the rain handle things. In this era, facial hair is more than style. It's identity, heritage, and defiance. Many soldiers, especially officers, grow mustaches with nationalistic pride. British Tommies mimic Kitchener's legendary facial growth. French soldiers lean into their waxed whiskers with revolutionary flair. Even Americans, though late to the game, carry on the trend, partly out of tradition and partly to distinguish themselves from the still clean-shaven recruits back home. Historians still argue whether this widespread mustachery was regulation, suggestion, or just cultural osmosis from European allies. The U.S. military didn't formally require mustaches during World War I, but in practice, they became ubiquitous among officers and NCOs. Some units saw them as signs of seniority, or even emotional resilience. Grow a good one, and it said, "I've been in the mud a while. I've seen some things." You crawl over to a dugout and sit beside a young lieutenant who, judging by his wispy upper lip, hasn't been around long. He's got a tin mirror and a razor that looks like it's seen better days. He's trying, really trying, to grow something respectable, but it's not happening. Still, he shaves around it every day, careful not to disturb what little is there. You realize it's not about style, it's about hope. There's something oddly comforting in the ritual. Amidst trench rot and mustard gas, maintaining a mustache becomes an act of order in a world gone feral. A symbolic finger in the eye of chaos. You may not be able to keep your boots dry, but by God, your mustache will be trimmed. And of course, there's the unspoken competitive aspect. You've heard tales, some probably exaggerated, of soldiers arguing over who had the thickest whiskers in the battalion. One anecdote tells of a sergeant who shaved his mustache into a shape that resembled his unit's insignia. He was reprimanded. Respectfully. Because let's face it, he did nail the eagle. You overhear stories of early American aviators being denied certain flight clearances because their mustaches interfered with their oxygen masks. Not officially, but pilots are a finicky breed, and high altitude doesn't mix well with anything loose or itchy under the nose. Still, many kept them. Risked it even. Because to show up at the hangar clean-shaven? That meant you were either brand new or had something to prove. Then there's the oddity of facial hair myths. You hear a French soldier insist that mustaches keep gas masks in place. A German across no man's land might have claimed the opposite, that they break the seal. Which one's true? Hard to say. What's certain is that someone probably got gas because they chose wax tips over a tight fit. And speaking of wax, did you know it was issued in some officer kits? A little tin, next to your rations and field compass. Because heaven forbid a mustache goes limp before a field inspection. One private, you recall, mixed his own concoction using axle grease and a bit of tea. It smelled awful, but apparently it held firm even through a 3-day march. It's that same spirit of stubborn vanity you see reflected in old black and white portraits. Men with 1,000-yard stares and perfect grooming. Bullet belts crisscrossed over pristine uniforms, and not a hair out of place on their upper lips. You can almost hear them thinking, if I'm going to die in the mud, I'll at least die looking like a gentleman. The war ends, eventually, but the mustache legacy lingers. Veterans return home carrying medals, scars, and their facial hair habits. And while some shave it off for civilian life, others keep it as a kind of souvenir, lip-bound proof that they were there. That they stood in the trench and still found time to style their faces. And yet, back home, military policy begins to shift. As modern warfare evolves and new uniforms are tailored, the Army's obsession with symmetry and cleanliness grows. Slowly, mustaches become less symbolic of gallantry and more a question of compliance. But you, sitting in this wooden trench with your muddy boots and your war-weary grin, don't know that yet. Right now, your mustache isn't bureaucracy. It's survival. Ritual. Identity. It's the last piece of yourself that no one, no matter how high the rank, can fully regulate. At least, not yet. You're no longer in the trenches. You're in an officer's club sometime in the 1920s, reclining in a leather chair that smells faintly of cigar smoke and shoe polish. Outside, the sun gleams off polished brass and stiff uniforms. Inside, it's all pressed trousers, crisp creases, and above all, mustaches. Thick ones, wiry ones, mustaches that curl, arch, or bristle with silent authority. Welcome to the post-war military gentleman's playground, where grooming is not just preference, it's class code. You take a sip of something aged and amber-colored, and glance across the room. Not a single upper lip is bare. It's like you've stumbled into a gentleman's league of whisker superiority, and you're very aware of your own freshly shaved lip. You feel naked. Vulnerable. Like the child who's wandered into the grown-up's poker game. This, you realize, isn't about war anymore. It's about status. After World War I, a peculiar shift begins. The American military, fresh from the chaos of the trenches, starts to embrace peacetime professionalism. And with that comes a subtle but very real social hierarchy, one that's expressed not just in rank and ribbons, but in the grooming of the face. Historians still argue whether this cultural grooming gap originated in Europe or bloomed independently in the US, but it's undeniable. By the interwar years, the mustache becomes a sign of refinement among officers, particularly those who graduated from West Point or other elite academies. The enlisted man? Expected to keep his upper lip clean, sharp, and obedient. But the officer, he's permitted a bit of flair. A carefully sculpted mustache that says, "I've seen things, led men, and now I dine with colonels." You picture a lieutenant colonel eyeing his reflection, angling the comb just so, while quietly judging his peers' symmetry. You see, barbers on base weren't just cutting hair. They were cultural enforcers. A good base barber knew the limits, not just of regulation, but of taste. He could tell from your branch, your rank, even your accent, what kind of mustache you were supposed to have. One former Army barber reportedly kept a scrapbook of officers' preferred cuts, organized by rank. There were rumors, never confirmed, of a secret stencil used for high-ranking mustaches to ensure uniformity during inspections. You hear a tale of a particularly proud captain who, convinced his mustache conveyed gravitas, began slicking it down with boot polish to deepen its tone. It backfired when he saluted a brigadier general and left a smudge on his upper lip. The general never forgot. Even base barbershops began subtly reflecting this divide. Officers got the deluxe seat, the steaming towels, the optional grooming wax. Enlisted men? A rough shave, a brisk sweep of talcum, and a warning. No fancy edges. One fringe anecdote, too juicy not to mention, involves a junior officer who insisted on wearing a monocle with his mustache. For effect. During inspection, his commanding officer paused, stared for a long moment, then said, "You may keep one eccentricity. Choose wisely." The monocle disappeared by morning. Still, there's a distinct psychological shift here. The mustache is no longer a symbol of field grit. It's now an accessory of peacetime preening. And yet, paradoxically, it retains its aura of masculine credibility. It's the one visible allowance of self-expression in a system built on conformity. You might be wearing the same uniform as everyone else, but that crescent of hair above your lip, that's yours. Carefully curated. Approved by culture, not just code. Of course, some soldiers tried to push the envelope. You hear whispers about a major in the 1930s who grew a mustache that curled past regulation boundaries. Not wildly, just enough to suggest flair. He was quietly rotated to a non-public facing role. The message was clear: be refined, but not too refined. Look like a leader, but not like a villain. It's here that you realize the Army's mustache culture walks a tightrope. Allow too much freedom, and suddenly everyone's showing up looking like a vaudeville performer. Clamp down too hard, and you risk morale, or worse, muted rebellion. That little strip of facial hair becomes a sort of Cold War in its own right. A quiet battle between individuality and uniformity, dignity and absurdity. And then there's the deeper, weirder truth: mustaches became unofficial identifiers. You walk into a room of officers, and before anyone speaks, you already have a read on who's who. That guy with the pencil-thin line? He's probably logistics. The one with the bristling fire hose of follicles? Infantry, no question. The salt and pepper chevron? Might have served under Pershing. Even military portraits began reflecting this unspoken code. Go look up official officer portraits from this period, you'll see it. A sea of mustaches, each slightly different, but all within the accepted spectrum of officer elegance. You start to wonder if West Point secretly offered grooming courses between artillery classes. And yet, underneath the polish, the tightrope persists. One general famously quipped that a mustache should command respect, not provoke laughter. You're not sure if that's a quote or a veiled warning. Still, one thing's clear: by the eve of World War II, the military mustache wasn't just back, it had matured. It had entered its country club era. Still regulated, still symbolic, but increasingly defined by nuance and unofficial etiquette rather than strict code. So you finish your drink, tip your cap to the major with the handlebar, and exit the club, aware now that in the U.S. Army of the interwar years, your mustache wasn't grown, it was earned. You're now hunched over a desk under dim fluorescent light, flipping through one of the most fastidiously specific manuals in the U.S. Army's entire history. Army Regulation 670-1. It sounds dry, and it is. Like desiccated field ration biscuit dry. But nestled between pages about fingernail length, sock material, and boot shine protocols lies something legendary: the official rules for your mustache. Welcome to the grooming gospel. The Mustache Commandment Slab. You skim past the uniform wear guidelines, the necktie tuck-in zone. Yes, that's real, and land finally on the facial hair section. There it is. Just a couple of paragraphs, but they throb with bureaucratic weight. You feel the tension rise, as if a sergeant major is breathing down your neck. AR 670-1 doesn't ban mustaches. Not quite. Instead, it cages them in very specific parameters. You may have a mustache, it declares with the tone of a stern librarian, but it must be neatly trimmed. It must be tapered. And most importantly, it must not extend past the corners of your mouth. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. You stare at yourself in the mirror. What counts as the corner of the mouth? Is it the vertical crease? The curve of your lips when you smile? The place where your lip becomes cheek? You begin to suspect the army hired philosophers to word this section. One obscure base legend tells of a first sergeant who allegedly carried a tiny metal stencil shaped like the ideal lip zone. During inspections, he'd whip it out and align it over a soldier's face like he was judging a particularly stubborn postage stamp. You practice your own compliance drills, looking in the mirror straight on, then angled, then smiling, then frowning. Does your mustache move? Does it misbehave? Welcome to the paranoia zone, where your own face betrays you. Historians still argue whether AR 671's mustache clause was a response to mid-century grooming trends or a broader crackdown on excessive individuality, following the cultural unrest of the Vietnam era. What's certain is that by the 1980s, the mustache had become the only acceptable form of facial rebellion, and even then, only under tight control. But here's the kicker: there's no exact measurement listed in the manual. It says, not past the corners, but never defines how far, how measured, or how fuzzy that boundary can be. It leaves room. Dangerous room. Just enough ambiguity to breed fear and opportunity. That's why the manual alone isn't enough. You're also subject to the whims of command. Your platoon sergeant might allow a generous sweep of bristles, while your company commander is a clean line only type. The inconsistency creates a bizarre power dynamic. You could be regulation perfect in one unit and non-compliant in another, just by transferring buildings. You hear about an unlucky corporal who got written up at Fort Bragg after months of peaceful mustache harmony at Fort Hood. Same face, different boss. One whisker too far and poof, verbal counseling. Another soldier, stationed overseas, claimed his mustache was approved stateside but too expressive for his European post. What does that even mean? Too expressive? What is it, reciting poetry? Then there are the mustache saboteurs. Fellow soldiers who, bored or petty or both, drop an anonymous complaint that your whiskers are crossing forbidden boundaries. You find yourself under facial investigation. It's like living in a dystopian barbershop drama. One fringe tidbit from a 1990s military etiquette guide suggested that soldiers should comb and flatten the mustache daily with water or wax to avoid accusations of unruliness. That's a real phrase. Accusations of unruliness. Imagine being taken aside and told your mustache is projecting a disruptive attitude. You'd laugh, if it weren't absolutely a thing that happens. And yet, the obsession with control makes a strange kind of sense in the army. The more unpredictable the job, the more the system craves consistency. You may be deployed to unknown terrain tomorrow, but today, your mustache? That can be regulated. Of course, AR 670-1 isn't static. It evolves. Every few years, the manual gets reviewed, revised, and released with subtle tweaks that send grooming-conscious soldiers scrambling. One year, the wording becomes stricter. The next, slightly vaguer. You start scanning updates like a Wall Street trader scanning stock charts. Wait, did they just say closely trimmed instead of neatly trimmed? Is that a change in policy? There was even a brief online rumor, probably born on Reddit, that a future AR 670-1 would require soldiers to submit a photo of their mustache for annual review. It turned out to be a hoax, but for a solid week, barracks conversations revolved around mustache lighting techniques and how to contour your lip for command approval. Then there's the timeless wild card, the Inspector General. The IG doesn't just enforce the rules, they interpret them. If an IG catches you with a too thick stache, they won't just scold you. They'll quote chapter and verse of the regulation, as if invoking it will summon the holy razor of justice. You find yourself navigating two realities: the written rules and the unwritten rules. The written ones say, neatly trimmed. The unwritten ones say, not too bold, not too soft, definitely not ironic. You think back to the private who tried to grow a novelty toothbrush mustache in silent protest. He didn't last long. And yet, despite all the fuss, there's something comforting about the pageantry. There's a ritual to it all. A soldier staring into the mirror every morning, clippering, tapering, second-guessing. The tiny war waged just beneath the nose. It's absurd. And kind of beautiful. Because AR 670-1 isn't just a rulebook, it's a reflection of the army itself. Equal parts order, tradition, paranoia, and pride. Your mustache, like your salute, becomes part of the script. Memorized. Enforced. Internalized. So you close the manual, sigh, and glance at your reflection. You ask yourself the eternal question whispered through generations of army personnel: is this mustache worth the paperwork? You're standing in line for morning formation, boots perfectly aligned, chin high, and breath fogging in the early chill. But what you're really thinking about isn't the inspection, it's the guy standing 2 people down from you. That guy. Every unit has one. The mustache rebel. The edge walker. The man whose lip hair is always just barely regulation. His name might be Gutierrez, or maybe Jackson, or possibly O'Reilly. Doesn't matter. You know the type. His mustache isn't absurd, it's artfully subversive. It fans out just a smidge past the corners of his mouth. You know it, he knows it, and critically, your squad leader definitely knows it. But no one said anything, yet. You try not to stare, but it's impossible. That thing flirts with danger. It dares the wind to blow it into the inspection line of sight. It lives on the razor's edge of acceptability. And honestly, it kind of rules. You watch him from the corner of your eye as the platoon sergeant begins his walk. Boots crunching gravel. Clipboard in hand. Eyebrows twitching. The sergeant's gaze lands on Gutierrez for a millisecond too long. A pause. A beat. Then, he moves on. You exhale. So does Gutierrez. You're not sure whether he's relieved or smug. Probably both. This dance happens week after week. The unspoken game of how far can I push it today? And it's not limited to just one guy. There are always contenders. Some guys trim just enough to stay under the radar. Others experiment in the mirror, tilting their heads at angles, seeing how far the fuzz creeps when they smile. It's like testing radar coverage on a stealth jet. Historians still argue whether this kind of grooming brinkmanship started with Cold War garrison life, or if it dates all the way back to the Spanish-American War, when soldiers were known to style their mustaches in ways that reflected the mood of their battalion, which is both hilarious and vague enough to sound true. You once heard about a sergeant in the early 80s who called these guys corner creepers, a term whispered like folklore. He's a creeper, they'd say, nodding toward the guy whose whiskers looked like they just booked a ticket west of the lip border. But here's the thing. These almost rebels often aren't trying to make some grand stand. They're not protesting grooming policy. They're just pushing back, in the smallest, most personal way they can. In a world where every sock, ribbon, haircut, and belt loop is regulated, a slightly longer mustache is the equivalent of painting a mural on a tank. There's a quirky tidbit about a corporal stationed in Alaska in the 90s who was caught applying chapstick to his mustache during field exercises. His reasoning? It helps with the frost. It didn't help his evaluation score, but he became a legend in his unit. You find that there's a quiet reverence for these guys. Not loud admiration, they're not exactly heroes, but a certain respect. They're the ones willing to test the invisible fence. Because sometimes that fence isn't written down. Sometimes it's made entirely of raised eyebrows and whispered warnings. And let's be real, half the appeal is the danger. The lip thrill. The whispered possibility of being told, fix that by tomorrow. Or worse, you're on profile review. You start to see how facial hair becomes its own kind of language. A bushier than allowed mustache? That's saying, I've been here long enough to know what I can get away with. A barely there whisper of a statch on a boot private? That says, I'm trying. Please don't mock me. There was a guy in your unit once who grew what everyone called the Shady Ranger. Not because he was special forces, but because his mustache was so faint and angular that it looked like it was hiding something. It wasn't thick enough to be suspicious, but too deliberate to be accidental. He shaved it before inspection, every time, then grew it back overnight like a lichen on duty. Then there's the guy who tried to blend his mustache into a very short goatee. That's the facial hair equivalent of trying to sneak a bass drum into a string quartet. He lasted exactly 1 weekend before his sergeant appeared with clippers in hand. There's something comical about how serious it all becomes. Full-grown adults, trained in combat, sweating over millimeters of hair. There's a rumor about one commander who, when asked about grooming leniency, replied, "This unit doesn't negotiate with follicles." People still quote that. Probably on mugs by now. But under the comedy lies real tension. Because if Gutierrez gets away with it, then Johnson might try it. And if Johnson pulls it off, then maybe half the platoon shows up looking like a biker gang. That's the fear. The thin, wiry, bristled line between order and chaos. So leadership has to draw the line somewhere. Even if that line happens to be the corner of your mouth. You learn the phrase, "Uniformity is discipline," before you even finish basic. And the mustache? That's your little battlefield for testing how elastic that phrase really is. And sometimes you push too far. You remember the day Gutierrez finally crossed the line. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even obvious. Just a Tuesday. Just a whisker too wide. And the sergeant, clipboard in hand, finally stopped and said, "Trim it, soldier." And Gutierrez? He smiled, just slightly, and said, "Roger that." Then turned, walked to the barracks, and 15 minutes later, emerged freshly shorn. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. Because he knew the dance. He'd stayed on the floor longer than most. You nod in respect. The mustache was temporary. But the legend? That sticks around. You're sitting in the back of a beige, government-issue courtroom now, wood-paneled walls, tired ceiling fans spinning overhead, and fluorescent lights flickering just enough to make you question your life choices. There's a soldier at the front table, stiff-backed, nervous, and very aware that all eyes are on his face. Not his uniform. Not his boots. His mustache. Yes, you're witnessing one of the strangest chapters in military discipline lore, when facial hair becomes a matter for formal adjudication. It's not that a handlebar mustache should lead to a court-martial, it's just that, occasionally it does. You lean back in your seat, almost waiting for the gavel to fall, and ask the question that's probably crossed the minds of 100 onlookers before you: how did we get here? The answer, unsurprisingly, lies in bureaucracy. Because once you make facial hair a matter of regulation, you open the door to paperwork. Warnings. Letters of counseling. And for the most persistent lip-hair renegades, non-judicial punishment. Article 15 territory. You might laugh, but it's happened. You once heard about a soldier stationed in Germany in the early 2000s who insisted on growing a waxed handlebar mustache. He argued quite earnestly that the regulation didn't specifically ban curls, only stated the hair couldn't extend horizontally past the corners of the mouth. His solution? A vertical curl. Straight up, like some kind of follicular fountain. According to legend, the company commander stared at him for a full 10 seconds before saying, "Private, you look like the villain in a silent movie." It escalated from there. First came a counseling statement. Then a written order to shave. Then, when the mustache remained unaltered, and possibly waxed even tighter, came the UCMJ action. Noncompliance. Willful disobedience. Disrespect by grooming. Historians still argue whether this specific case led to a revision in the wording of AR 670-1 regarding, styled, mustaches, but it certainly rattled the policy cage. The Army suddenly realized, if you don't define the direction of hairstyling, someone will find a loophole. And you better believe soldiers are master loophole hunters. You sit through testimony where 2 NCOs describe the offending mustache with phrases like, aggressively sculpted, distractingly flamboyant, and likely to snag on equipment. The accused offers his defense. It was within regulation length and never interfered with duty. He even produced a diagram. A diagram of the mustache's dimensions. You stifle a laugh. The judge does not. But let's be clear, it's not just about appearance. In the Army, non-compliance isn't measured in inches, it's measured in attitude. A barely past the corner mustache can be fine on one soldier and insubordination on another, depending on how it's delivered. Defiance by grooming is a real thing. It's quiet, subversive, and almost impossible to unsee once you recognize it. One fringe tidbit involves a 1970s-era chaplain who was known for his bushy, God-fearing mustache. When ordered to trim it, he allegedly quoted scripture about Samson's strength and refused. The details are fuzzy, but rumor has it he was quietly reassigned to chapel duties where fewer eyes would fall upon his rebellious bristles. And it's not just the Army. The Air Force once had a petty rivalry known as the Mustache March, where pilots would grow out lip hair during the month of March in tribute to Robin Olds, a legendary fighter ace who wore his mustache as protest against grooming regs. The brass hated it. The pilots loved it. It turned into an unofficial tradition so strong that even modern airmen sometimes participate, quietly, subtly, daring their superiors to object. The Army, of course, was not amused by this trend bleeding into their ranks. There's a real debate that surfaces every few years. Should failure to adhere to grooming standards be treated with the same gravity as, say, uniform violations or insubordination? On one hand, a mustache seems trivial. On the other, rules are rules, and if you bend one, you can bend them all. So here you are, watching a courtroom where that philosophical question plays out in real time. Witnesses describe the mustache. Diagrams are submitted. Regulation language is parsed with the precision of a nuclear arms treaty. Someone even brings up the phrase, on military appearance. You wonder if the Geneva Conventions ever imagined this. And somewhere in this chaos, the accused must be thinking, was it worth it? That extra curl. That half-inch of personal expression. That stubborn refusal to back down. Probably not, if we're being practical. But on some level, every soldier who's ever pushed the boundary gets it. The mustache isn't just hair. It's identity. Individuality. The tiniest, most controllable act of resistance in an environment where nearly everything else is dictated for you. Still, consequences are consequences. And for those who double down, the results can range from a simple shave it off order to serious career setbacks. Promotion boards don't tend to favor the guy known for grooming drama, no matter how immaculate his PT scores are. You even recall a more recent example, a reservist whose mustache became so controversial on social media, yes, it had a hashtag, that his command had to release a statement clarifying their interpretation of AR 670-1. Imagine being publicly called out by your own unit for face hair. That's a level of bureaucracy even Kafka might have found excessive. And yet, somehow, it all makes sense. Because in the Army, it's never just about the mustache. It's about obedience, cohesion, and the appearance of discipline. The face is the first thing civilians see. A rogue mustache says, "I don't care about the rules." And that can't fly, not when the entire machine depends on everyone playing their part. So the gavel falls. The verdict is issued. Maybe it's a written reprimand. Maybe a reduction in rank. Or maybe, just maybe, the soldier agrees to shave, and the whole thing vanishes into base legend. You walk out of the courtroom and look around at the passing soldiers. Every clean upper lip. Every meticulously trimmed regulation stache. You know now, they didn't just choose that look. They earned it, in court. You're wading through humid jungle now, boots squelching in wet soil, sweat clinging to your neck like a second uniform. It's Vietnam. The kind of thick, stifling heat where razors rust overnight, and shaving cream turns to soup before it hits your face. And yet, somewhere between ambush drills and mosquito swatting, you notice it. The mustaches are still here. But something's different. These aren't the manicured, officers' club mustaches of the post-war years. They're rougher. Wilder. Unapologetically scruffy. In Vietnam, the regulation mustache is less an accessory and more a quiet act of rebellion. You glance around your fire team. There's Martinez with his bushy lip fringe that's starting to curl upward like it has plans of its own. There's Hughes, who gave up trimming weeks ago and now sports something between a Tom Selleck and a jungle vine. Nobody's saying much about it. Because honestly, nobody has time to care. At least, not until Command shows up. That's when the whisper travels through camp. Command's coming. Suddenly, razors appear. Clippers buzz. Bottles of aftershave are pulled from the depths of rucksacks like relics. Beards vanish. Mustaches shrink. And for a brief few hours, regulation reigns again, until the jungle swallows it whole. Historians still argue whether Vietnam-era grooming leniency was tacitly accepted due to field conditions, or whether it emerged from a growing divide between frontline reality and Command's need to maintain appearances. What's clear is that the war's unique conditions cracked the veneer of regulation in a way few conflicts had before. Think about it. You're running combat patrols in monsoon season, knee-deep in leeches, with a pack that weighs more than a fire hydrant. Are you really going to stop and wonder if your mustache crosses the sacred mouth corner threshold? And yet, grooming standards still existed. Technically, the Army's official policies hadn't changed. But unofficially? In the field, you were often judged more by your aim than your aesthetics. Still, that didn't stop the occasional crackdown. You remember the day a visiting colonel dropped into your firebase via Huey. The man stepped out with aviators, a spotless uniform, and the kind of bare upper lip that could slice paper. Within an hour, the mood changed. Word went out. High and tight, boys. He's a no facial hair guy. The next morning, a full-blown grooming scramble. Guys were shaving with whatever they had, soap, canteen water, even machetes. One guy used dental floss as a makeshift thread to pull out individual hairs. That evening, the colonel left. By morning, the jungle took its pound of whiskers back. There's something surreal about that cycle, an endless ebb and flow of hair and hierarchy. Field commanders tried to balance morale with regulation. Enforcement was inconsistent at best. One lieutenant let his entire platoon grow mustaches. As long as you keep your weapons clean. Another banned them outright after a mustache-themed bet got out of hand and ended with someone painting a nose art statue on a claymore case. And don't even get started on sideburns. Sideburns were the wild card of Vietnam grooming. Some soldiers grew them so long they looked like inverted handlebars. One sergeant in Da Nang claimed his sideburns gave him swamp vision. Whatever that meant. Command didn't buy it. He was reassigned to paperwork duty for follicular noncompliance. But despite the chaos, the mustache endured, not just as a grooming choice, but as a form of camaraderie. Entire squads would start growing them together. A kind of upper lip solidarity. You were one of us, you belong. A shared defiance that said, we're here. We're fighting. Let us have this. One fringe anecdote involves a reconnaissance team that allegedly refused to shave until they completed a 30-day deep patrol. They returned with what one major described as a collection of faces that would terrify a razor. But they'd completed their mission, and the major, to his credit, said nothing. You smile at that memory. Because in Vietnam, where everything was hot, loud, and uncertain, sometimes your mustache was the only part of your body that felt like yours. And then, there's the psychological side. Soldiers began associating facial hair with toughness. Survival. You'd look in the mirror after 2 weeks in the bush, bloodshot eyes and a scraggly mustache, and think, I made it. I'm still here. The hair was a timeline. A visual ticker of days endured. Yet back at the rear, or on RNR, the rules snapped back into place. You'd walk into a PX and see the signs. No facial hair outside regulation. You'd get clocked by a staff sergeant for a mustache that was too bushy, even if you just returned from a firebase that looked like Jurassic Park. There's even a rumor of one guy who brought a fake regulation mustache with him, pre-trimmed, measured to perfection. He'd swap it onto his upper lip using spirit gum before inspections, then peel it off after. Maybe it's an urban legend. But maybe not. Because if there's one thing Vietnam taught you, it's that regulation and reality are often two different jungles. And in that leafy, muddied divide, the mustache became a symbol of everything the manual couldn't reach. You pack up your gear, wipe the sweat from your brow, and glance around at the guys who haven't shaved in a week. Nobody says anything. Nobody needs to. Because in Vietnam, the jungle always wins. But the mustache? The mustache survives. You're marching under a brilliant blue sky now, stars and stripes fluttering overhead, brass glinting in the sun. It's the 1980s, Reagan's America. The Cold War is back in full swing, shoulder pads are huge, Top Gun is in theaters, and your mustache? It better be squared away. Because welcome to the patriotic power stache era. You glance at your reflection in a barracks mirror and see what most American soldiers see in this decade: a tight fade, an even tighter uniform, and a mustache that walks the line between military precision and personal flair. You're not trying to look like a rock star. You're trying to look like someone who wins wars just by standing still. This is the age of image. America's military is rebuilding after Vietnam. It's a full-on reset, new doctrine, new funding, new uniforms, and yes, new grooming expectations. The mustache, still clinging to its regulation slot in AR 670-1, becomes a curious symbol. It's old school, yes, but also officially sanctioned individualism. One tiny area of the face where freedom still lives. And man, do soldiers lean into it. From Fort Bragg to the Fulda Gap, the mustache in the 1980s becomes the signature accessory of the confident, squared-away NCO. There's the grizzled staff sergeant with a thick stripe of facial armor. The fireplug drill sergeant with a bristled broom under his nose. The young lieutenant trying, and failing, to grow something that doesn't look like smudged graphite. You see it everywhere. You see it in formation. Like some coordinated parade of masculine punctuation marks. But of course, regulation still rules. The mustache can't touch the lip line. It can't creep beyond the corners. You know the mantra. You've read it, heard it, internalized it. Still, the 1980s soldier, buoyed by a rising sense of patriotic pride, tends to test just how bold a regulation stache can get. Historians still argue whether this decade marks a shift in how the mustache was perceived, less a relic of past wars, more a conscious nod to military identity in an increasingly image-conscious society. After all, this is the era of recruitment ads with thunderous drumlines and slow-motion salutes. Facial hair had to keep up. And sometimes it didn't. You remember that one staff sergeant who went too far. Big guy. Good leader. Solid PT scores. But his mustache started creeping, curling slightly upward, maybe even smiling, when he didn't. Rumor had it he trimmed around it with eyebrow scissors and shaped it using a toothbrush. One day, a colonel walked through the motor pool and stopped in his tracks. 5 seconds of silence. Then a flat command. Fix that, Sergeant. The next day? Shaved clean. Morale dropped 3 points unit-wide. Then there were the guys who tried to hide their creativity. One soldier used concealer to fade the edges of his mustache and make it appear shorter. Another allegedly cut out individual hairs with tweezers rather than trimming, claiming it gave better definition. There were whisper tips passed around the barracks like bootleg cassette tapes. Use mustache wax sparingly, don't trim when your face is cold, never, never, trust a PX barber before inspection day. And yet, despite all the discipline, the mustache retained a kind of quiet charisma. It was something a soldier could own. In a decade defined by polished surfaces and flag-waving optimism, the Lipfa said, "I'm in the system, but I've still got a little edge." You flashed to that famous Ronald Reagan image, clean-shaven, yes, but surrounded by generals, many of whom sport magnificent regulation mustaches. It became a subtle way to say, "I'm a warrior. I'm traditional. I mean business." Even Hollywood caught on. Think of every military movie from the era. There's always that one character, stoic, steel-eyed, mustached, who's clearly the veteran. The mentor. The guy who yells without blinking. Somewhere between Tom Selleck and an ammo can. But the regulations never loosened. Not once. Despite the cultural shifts, AR 670-1 held fast. In fact, this was the period when the Army tightened its language in some places, clarifying phrases like neatly trimmed and re-emphasizing that mustaches must not interfere with equipment use. One memo from an airborne unit allegedly warned that a misaligned whisker could compromise mask fit and mission success. That's probably an exaggeration. Or maybe not. There was a documented case of a gas mask seal test failing during a training op because the soldier had thick mustache hairs that bunched up near his nostrils. After that, mandatory face seal checks included visual mustache inspection. One instructor called it the whisker check. You wish you were joking. There's also a lesser-known bit of grooming trivia from the 1980s, the mustache waiver. It was rare, unofficial, and mostly used for undercover or liaison work, but in very specific situations, certain soldiers were authorized to grow beards and more elaborate mustaches for role-based assignments. The waiver process was so secretive that most soldiers didn't even know it existed. It was the grooming equivalent of being in a Black Ops unit. Only hairier. But for the rest of you, no such luck. You kept your mustache in the approved zone. Measure not with a ruler, but with judgment. Too thick? Trouble. Too thin? Boot. Just right? You're golden. And you began to notice the power dynamics of mustache culture. A private with a mustache? Questionable. A sergeant with a mustache? Respectable. A lieutenant colonel with a mustache? Unquestionable. It was like rank applied directly to your face. Even across branches you saw it play out. Army mustaches were usually trim and stern. Marines rarely wore them, too high speed. Navy officers occasionally went full maritime villain. Air Force guys? Wild cards. Some had tight stripes. Others had full-on falcon crest extras. But only the Army kept it this, regulated. So you tuck in your shirt, smooth down your collar, and give your stache one last glance in the mirror. Not too long. Not too thick. Not too flashy. Just patriotic enough. You're standing at attention, eyes fixed forward, back impossibly straight, while a voice drills through the air like a sonic bayonet. Drop and give ME-20! Echoes across the training yard, and around you, raw recruits scramble into position. Sweat beads on foreheads. Heartbeats quicken. And standing above it all, barking, pacing, glaring, is a man whose authority radiates from every inch of his body, especially the inch right under his nose. The drill sergeant's mustache. It's not decorative. It's not ironic. It is pure intimidation, a horizontal warning label that says, "Don't test me." You gulp. Because in basic training, where every detail is scrutinized and every deviation is punished, that mustache is more than facial hair. It's an institution. A symbol. A rite of passage in follicular form. And you, poor soul, are not allowed to have one. Not yet. AR 670-1 makes that crystal clear. Recruits in basic combat training are forbidden from growing mustaches. Zero tolerance. Clean-shaven, every morning, with razors that feel like they were issued during the Korean War. You're issued a bag of shaving supplies on day one and expected to use them with almost religious devotion. Woe unto the private whose stubble appears during morning formation. And while you're out there, shaving your face with cold water and a cracked plastic mirror, the drill sergeant looms. Always immaculate. Always shouting. And always sporting a regulation-perfect mustache that could have its own line in the chain of command. Historians still argue whether the drill sergeant's iconic mustache rose to prominence in the Vietnam era or if it truly crystallized in the 1980s with the rebirth of the all-volunteer force. Either way, by the time you show up, it's gospel. And it's not just any mustache. These things are engineered. Symmetrical. Fear-inducing. There's a precision to them, like they were calibrated by military engineers. A good drill sergeant trims that lip hair with more focus than he uses to field strip an M4. You've heard rumors of mirror angle techniques, of using index cards for edge guides, even of beard dye to keep it looking extra formidable. One drill sergeant was known to pluck individual hairs at 5 a.m. because they grew in. Unmotivated. And here's the kicker, no one would dare question his grooming. You once saw a visiting officer hesitate, before reminding a drill sergeant about a slightly off-center name tape. That's the power of the mustache. It gives the drill sergeant a kind of facial rank that doesn't show up on paperwork. You could have a clean uniform and a crisp salute, but if your mustache doesn't look like it can yell back, forget it. There's even a phrase among some units. That's a sergeant statch. Meaning, don't mess with him. Don't question it. Just assume he's right, and you're wrong, and get back to doing push-ups. Of course, not every drill sergeant wears one. But when they do, it's like a part of the persona, right up there with the campaign hat, the mirrored sunglasses, and the voice that somehow penetrates solid walls. You hear stories from basic across generations. In the 90s, one drill sergeant allegedly shaped his mustache with a protractor. In the 2000s, another kept a picture of his mustache taped inside his locker to ensure daily consistency. And in more recent years, you hear about sergeants who coach younger NCOs on facial leadership presence. It's not officially taught, but everyone knows it matters. There's even a fringe tale, probably apocryphal, of a recruit who, desperate to emulate his instructor, drew on a fake mustache with a pen. He got smoked so hard he didn't grow hair for a week. Lesson learned. And you're not imagining it. The mustache plays into authority on a primal level. Psychologists have noted that facial hair, especially neatly groomed lip hair, can signal confidence, maturity, and dominance. So when your drill sergeant barks an order with that perfect stripe of facial steel under his nose, your brain doesn't just hear him, it obeys him. You remember those long, blistering days of basic, where you shaved every morning whether you needed to or not. And every day, you looked up at that glistening mustache of command and thought, someday I'll earn one of those. But here's the real twist. Once you graduate, you can grow one. But it has to be within reg. And that's when the mirror becomes your new drill sergeant. You try to sculpt it. Taper it. Keep it tidy. You model it after your instructors, but somehow it just doesn't have the same impact. Maybe it's the confidence. Or maybe it's the fact that you're still not allowed to yell at people for breathing wrong. Still, the tradition lives on. There are even internal competitions, unofficial of course, where drill sergeants are ranked by the quality of their statch. You've heard of one at Fort Jackson dubbed the Lip Trophy, a wooden mustache mounted on a plaque, awarded monthly. A fringe piece of barracks lore, but it's there. And no one wants to be the sergeant with the weakest whiskers. But beyond the jokes, there's something honorable in it. The mustache becomes a symbol of experience, of control, of professionalism honed to a literal edge. It's not rebellion. It's responsibility. Because unlike the guy in your unit who pushes the limit for fun, the drill sergeant's mustache is earned. Maintained. Patrolled like a forward operating base. It's not just regulation, it is regulation. So you stand there, boots polished, chin up, clean-shaven and dreaming of the day when your face might one day command a room without you having to say a word. All you'll need is the right mustache. You're in a dimly lit barracks rec room now, sprawled on a creaky vinyl couch with your boots unlaced and your camo blouse hanging loose. There's a box fan humming, a deck of playing cards half shuffled on the table, and a few soldiers muttering about the upcoming inspection. And right next to you, half hidden by the couch cushion, sits a man with a mustache that doesn't quite look regulation. Welcome to the underground. Not the kind with tunnels and espionage. No, this one's fuzzier. Quiet. Personal. A movement hidden in plain sight. You've stepped into the secret world of the 1990s Army mustache underground. It's not an actual rebellion. There are no manifestos or organized grooming mutinies. But in the quiet margins of Army life, after hours off-duty, in the reserve units and motor pools, you begin to notice it. Soldiers tweaking, growing, and shaping mustaches just enough to test the perimeter of what's allowed. Not to break the rules, just to bend them gently and hope nobody notices. You glance at Carter from Supply, whose statch looks like it's been styled with a thumb and a prayer. Or Sergeant Lowe from Maintenance, who's sporting something dangerously close to a mid-90s biker statch. You don't say anything. He doesn't say anything. But everyone knows. Historians still argue whether this quiet grooming renaissance was a reaction to post-Cold War drawdowns or just a reflection of broader cultural looseness in the 90s. The army was shifting. Not in discipline, exactly, but in mood. Peacekeeping missions replaced prolonged combat. Funding saw ebbs and flows. Units relaxed. And in that easing of tension, mustaches began to creep out of the shadows. And some of them? Pretty wild. There's the guy who shapes his upper lip into a swooping swoosh and calls it his Nike stache. The one who uses mascara to fill in light patches. B4 who won't admit it, but clearly uses his wife's brow pencil to give his mustache definition on inspection days. You start hearing whispers of grooming tactics. Tricks passed along like secret recipes. Shave every other day to keep the illusion of fullness. Use mustache wax sparingly. Too much and you'll get accused of grooming for flair. One soldier uses a clear lip balm to keep his hairs pointed straight like little soldiers of their own. And when someone gets called out, there's a collective groan. Not anger, just disappointment. He got too bold. He went full magnum too fast. He forgot we're in the underground, not a biker rally. There's one story you'll never forget. Private Lee from 3rd Platoon. Showed up from leave with a thick, glorious, movie star mustache. Clearly grown out of reg. Instead of shaving, he claimed it was medically necessary. No one bought it. A week later, he came back shaved and humbled, muttering something about command not understanding the art. Still, the mustache underground doesn't die. It evolves. Gets smarter. More subtle. Because in this era, the line between regulation and personality gets just wide enough to slip a whisker through. Commanders mostly turn a blind eye, as long as your PT score's good and your rifle's clean. You could sneak a little style in. Not too much. Just enough to remind yourself you're a human being with a face, not just a uniform with a serial number. And it's not just about looks. It becomes community. You bond with other mustache guys. Share silent nods. Exchange trimming tips. Offer judgment-free looks of approval. It's like being in a club where the membership card grows directly out of your face. There's even a secret language developing. Full bird fuzz means a colonel-worthy mustache. PX line is the invisible limit you never want to cross. Ghost liner refers to a guy whose mustache is technically present, but so faint it might disappear if he sneezes. One fringe tidbit? Some soldiers would stencil their ideal mustache shapes onto paper and tape them to the inside of their lockers for inspiration. You once saw a guy with a cutout of Tom Selleck next to a shaving mirror. His caption read, "Know your enemy." But the underground's not just about fun. There's always risk. You remember the day Specialist Grant got nailed. He'd been slowly thickening his stash for weeks, just enough to pass glances. Then a new first sergeant rolled in, fresh from a no-nonsense unit in Texas. Boom, Grant was pulled aside, given a warning, and told to sweep the sidewalk off your face. Harsh. But fair. He shaved by lunch. Still, within days, the quiet experiments resumed. Short, tapered, careful. Not bold. Not flamboyant. Just present. The underground doesn't disappear. It just adjusts its mirrors. And sure, it's easy to dismiss it all. What's the big deal? A few hairs on a face? But you know it's more than that. It's identity. It's control. In a world where your daily schedule is carved in stone and your wardrobe consists of 2 shades of green, your mustache is a whisper of choice. A reminder that you're still you underneath the uniform. And so, back in the barracks, you sit with the other undergrounders, swapping quiet glances. The fan hums on. A razor buzzes faintly from the latrine. You feel your own upper lip and wonder, just wonder, how far you might be able to go next week. A fraction of an inch? A new angle? Maybe a little wax? Probably not. But then again, maybe. It's Friday evening, and you're out of uniform. You've traded your boots for sneakers, your ACUs for jeans, and for the first time all week, your face is your own. Sort of. Because you're a weekend warrior now, National Guard or Army Reserve, and you live in the sacred space between two worlds. Monday through Friday? Civilian life. Job, school, maybe family. But once a month, on that magically ominous drill weekend, you step back into the machine. Uniform on. Hair trimmed. Face shaved, exactly to code. And that's where things get complicated. Because when it comes to mustaches in the Guard and Reserve, the rules are the same, but the enforcement a little fuzzier. Pun intended. You stand in your bathroom mirror on a Thursday night, evaluating your week's progress. There it is, just peeking out, your weekend whiskers. The lip line looks clean, the corners of your mouth are just safe, but is it within reg? Depends on who's inspecting. Depends on which unit you're with. Depends, frankly, on what kind of week your first sergeant had. So you play the weekend game. Do you shave it all off and play it safe? Or do you trim it just so and hope that in a sea of part-timers, nobody squints too hard? You're not alone. This is the realm of drill weekend grooming strategy, a quiet, unspoken art passed between reservists like tips on tax deductions. You meet guys who grow their mustaches out every month between drills, only to shear them down Saturday morning. One guy keeps a second razor in his glove box. Another shaves in the armory parking lot with a tiny bottle of water and a scrap of mirror. Can't risk it, he tells you. Last year, I missed a spot and got flagged during formation. Never again. Historians still argue whether grooming enforcement slackens in the Guard because of its hybrid nature or if it simply varies based on command culture and operational tempo. Either way, the difference is real. You hear phrases like stateside soft and garrison goatee whispered in locker rooms. And while beards are still off limits, unless you've got a shaving profile, the mustache remains that legal sliver of individuality some soldiers cling to between city life and camo duty. And oh, how they cling! You meet a specialist who proudly declares he has a Thursday through Sunday statch. His job? Middle school math teacher. His students think it's hilarious. His captain, less so. Another guy works IT during the week and uses his webcam background to blur his face just enough to avoid explaining why he looks like a 1970s detective. It's my Guard identity. He shrugs. I grow it, I tame it, I shave it. It's like reverse cosplay. Then there's the shaver's remorse phenomenon, the Sunday night regret of having to remove a weekend's worth of mustache magic just to return to your desk job at the insurance office. You stare in the mirror, razor in hand, feeling like you're scraping away a piece of your personality. And yet most of you do it. Because regulation is regulation, and you signed up for this. Still, you learn to work the margins. One quirky example? There's a reservist in your unit, tall, soft-spoken, always squared away. On weekends, he has a mustache so faint it's practically theoretical. But when drill ends and Monday rolls around, he shows up to his real-world job with a full-blown horseshoe statch. Turns out, he shaves it into regulation for army time, then fills it in like a canvas for the rest of the week. Why? You ask him once. He just shrugs. It's like my superhero mask, but in reverse. There's a whole psychology to this dual-life grooming. When you're a part-time soldier, your face becomes a toggled identity badge. Shaved lip? Time to salute. Mustache and bloom? Time to grill burgers and file taxes. And yet, the overlap is never clean. You've had civilian coworkers comment on your sudden 5 o'clock shadow. You've had fellow soldiers raise an eyebrow at your off-duty stubble. You've even had moments where you forget which version of your face you're wearing. Were you supposed to trim today? Is this a shave day? What weekend is it? One fringe story floats through the National Guard grapevine. A guy who grew a massive mustache during his annual training in the desert, only to have it immortalized in a photo used for unit recruiting posters. By the time the photo circulated, he'd been ordered to shave. But the image lived on. Legendary non-reg statch, forever preserved in army marketing. That's how it goes in the mustache underground of part-timers. Your facial hair isn't just aesthetic. It's situational. Strategic. A code you learn to write with tiny blades and nervous glances at your chain of command. And make no mistake, weekend enforcement does happen. You've heard of sergeants who arrive early just to inspect grooming. "Don't embarrass me out there," they say. You represent this unit, even if you only see it once a month. So you learn to hedge your bets. Keep a razor in your go bag. Carry a pocket mirror. Know your angles. And always, have a plan B if your whiskers get called out during morning roll call. You never know when your harmless weekend stash might become the reason your squad has to do push-ups. Still, when Monday morning hits and you walk into your civilian job, there's that moment, every month, where you hesitate at the mirror. Your upper lip looks bare again. The mustache is gone. But you smile, just a little. Because you know next month? It grows back. You're scrolling through your phone now, lying on your bunk with one boot still on, the other halfway dangling off. It's 2020-something. Your thumbs flick past memes, trending hashtags, and an endless stream of hot takes. And then, there it is. A video. A soldier, still in camo, lip-lined with a suspiciously thick mustache. He's lip-syncing to a rap track in front of a porta-shower. The caption reads, "When you've been deployed 3 months and no one's noticed your non-reg statch." The comments? Exploding. "Bro looking like G.I. Joe's rebellious cousin. Tag the sergeant who needs to see this." AR 670 to 1 left the chat. You smirk. Because in the social media era, the mustache isn't just a personal statement, it's gone viral. Welcome to the TikTok soldier's dilemma. In this new digital battlefield, grooming violations are no longer private affairs. One poorly timed selfie, one TikTok challenge, and suddenly your upper lip is under national scrutiny. Not from your CO. From everyone. It used to be that if your mustache crossed the corner of your mouth, you'd get pulled aside during inspection. Now, you might wake up and find your face clipped into a meme, dissected by uniformed nerds in the comments, or, if you're lucky, celebrated by millions for your bold take on facial freedom. It's the era of performance. Of image. And you, whether you want to or not, are on camera. And it gets tricky fast. Historians still argue whether social media's effect on military grooming policy has helped transparency or just accelerated the anxiety around noncompliance. Because every soldier with a smartphone is now a walking, talking public information release. And every mustache, every shadow of stubble, becomes potential content. You see it in the way soldiers pose in barracks videos, head tilted, lighting angled, making sure the mustache just looks sharp enough to pass, but stylish enough to pop on screen. You've seen guys edit their videos to blur their lip line. Others wear their reg-pushing statches like a badge of honor. Hashtag StatchOps. Hashtag upper lip freedom. Hashtag reg but still cool. Yes, those are real. There was that infamous moment in 2021 when a private's TikTok of his deployment mustache glow up hit over 2 million views. He documented the growth daily, framing it like a time-lapse masterpiece. But halfway through week 3, sharp-eyed viewers noticed something. His mustache had crossed the sacred mouth corner threshold. And sure enough, someone tagged his unit. By morning, the video was gone. By afternoon, he was clean-shaven. But the internet never forgets. That's the tightrope now. Every grooming decision you make could end up as content. You find yourself checking not just the mirror, but the angle. You ask, is this AR 670-1 in portrait mode? Even commanders aren't immune. You saw that one colonel on a live stream Q&A with a mustache that looked suspiciously styled. The comment section lit up with, "Sir, that curl looks tactical," and "We need coordinates on that facial hair." To his credit, the colonel laughed. But you know someone filed a memo afterward. And it's not just TikTok. Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, even Facebook videos from deployed units. Every frame has a face. And every face has facial hair, real, attempted, or forbidden. There's also a newer breed of soldier emerging, the grooming influencer. Yes, seriously. These are the guys, and a few bold NCOs, who make content purely about navigating army regs while keeping personal flair. They do side-by-sides, regulation versus pushing it. They review trimmers. They break down AR 670 to 1 like legal analysts discussing a Supreme Court case. One guy even launched a YouTube series called Whisker Watch. Every episode begins with a dramatic close-up of his upper lip. It's hilarious. And strangely educational. But it also comes with risk. Because one viral moment can make your mustache the face of noncompliance. And when command catches wind of it, oh, they will catch wind of it. You'll get the dreaded message. Report to the first sergeant's office. Bring a razor. And yet, some soldiers lean into it. You heard about a reservist who grew a mustache so borderline it became a recurring character on his TikTok account. He gave it a name. He gave it opinions. One post showed the mustache, arguing, with the regulation book. Another? A dramatic montage of it being shaved off before drill, with sad music and black and white filters. It got 500,000 likes. And yeah, command made him take it down. But for one shining weekend, his mustache was famous. One fringe tidbit? There's a Discord server, invite only, of course, dedicated entirely to discussing facial hair in uniform. Not just Army either. Multi-branch. Navy, Marines, Air Force. Cross-service debates over corner thresholds, trimmer models, and theoretical reg-friendly curls. One guy claimed to have 3D printed a mustache measuring stencil. Another swears by a toothbrush handle for edge guidance. But behind the memes and antics, the dilemma is real. Because now, the decision to grow a mustache, once made in front of a bathroom mirror, is made in front of an audience. You're not just thinking, will my sergeant care? You're thinking, will this get clipped into a reaction video with 10 million views and a sarcastic voiceover? The internet didn't invent mustache controversy in the Army. It just turned it into content. And as you lie back on your bunk, thumbing through another wave of reels, you can't help but smile when you see another soldier, freshly shaved, post a video that simply says, "RIP to my mustache. Command found the TikTok." You're staring into a foggy mirror again. Same uniform. Same tap water shave. But this time, something's different. You're not rushing to avoid a write-up, not stressing over a TikTok comment, not testing the edges of AR 670 to 1. This time, you're just tired. The kind of tired that sits deep behind your eyes and carries the weight of long shifts, longer deployments, and whatever chaos your civilian life decided to throw on top. And as you study the stubble on your upper lip, you start to wonder, not is this in reg? But why do I even care anymore? This is where morale enters the picture. Not the fake, rah-rah kind. The real, fragile, easily overlooked morale that comes from small comforts. And for some soldiers, especially the ones who've been at this a while, that comfort grows right under their nose. It's easy to mock. It's just a mustache, right? A line of hair barely longer than a thumbnail. But in the barracks, in the field, in the mess hall at 0:30, it matters. More than it should. Historians still argue whether the military's grooming standards have had measurable effects on morale since World War II, or whether any observed patterns are just anecdotal. But you don't need a white paper to know the truth. Some guys keep shaving because they're hanging on. Others grow a mustache because they need to. You remember a buddy who went through a brutal divorce back home while deployed. The only thing he did for himself during those months? Let his mustache grow. He called it therapeutic defiance. Said he needed some part of his life to be under his control. "I can't fix my marriage," he told you once. "But I can control this line on my face." And it helped. You could see it. The way he stood up a little straighter when someone commented on how clean it looked. The way he smiled just slightly wider when it passed inspection without a word. It's not about facial hair. It's about agency. When you live in a world where the time you eat, sleep, run, clean, salute, and speak is regulated, personal rituals take on enormous weight. Trimming a mustache becomes meditative. Checking the corners becomes grounding. It's 5 minutes in the morning where you decide what to do. And for some, It's a lifeline. There's a quiet, often overlooked link between grooming habits and mental health. Psychologists refer to it as maintenance motivation. When someone's struggling, burned out, depressed, anxious, it often shows up in how they care for themselves. Hair, hygiene, sleep. So a soldier who keeps shaving? That's a soldier still fighting to stay engaged. A soldier who starts growing a mustache again after a rough patch? That's a kind of recovery. You remember that one guy, post-deployment, who couldn't stop sleeping. Didn't talk much. Seemed detached. But one morning, he walked into formation with a whisper of a mustache. Just enough to say, "I'm here. I'm back." Nobody said anything. But everybody noticed. You've seen the opposite too. The guy who suddenly stops trimming. Lets it grow wild. Doesn't bother checking for regulation. Not because he's being rebellious, but because he's checked out. Those whiskers are a cry for help louder than any verbal outburst. And command? Well, they notice too, eventually. A lot of units quietly monitor grooming as an unofficial pulse check. It's not policy. Just common sense. If a soldier who's normally squared away starts letting things slide, boots unpolished, mustache over the limit, uniform sloppy, it raises red flags. But the tricky part? Sometimes what looks like rebellion is just coping. One fringe story still circles your unit. A sergeant in the late 2000s lost a close friend in an IED blast. Came home from Afghanistan and started growing his mustache longer than regulation allowed. Just barely. Just past the corners. When told to shave it, he did. Then grew it back. Again. And again. Finally, someone sat him down, not for discipline, but for a conversation. Turned out, the mustache was his way of keeping a connection to the buddy he'd lost. They'd both made a pact, grow them out after deployment. And now, one of them couldn't. That's the thing about mustaches. They don't just grow out of boredom or style, or even defiance. Sometimes they grow from grief. So maybe you're looking at yourself in the mirror now, wondering if this thin stripe of hair is worth the effort. The inspections. The risk of being told to wipe it off like it's a mistake. But maybe, just maybe, it's worth keeping. Because it makes you feel a little more like you. It reminds you that, despite the formation drills, the sergeant major's lectures, the weekend duties, and the weight of everything else, you still have a say in at least one thing. You know it doesn't fix everything. But it helps. And sometimes it helps, is enough. So you lean in. Check the corners. Give it a careful trim. Because today, the mustache isn't about regulation. It's about resilience. You're sitting on the edge of your bunk, razor in hand, and a fresh towel draped over your shoulder. Your face is lathered, eyes locked on the mirror. But you're not shaving yet. You're hesitating. Because the question that's been creeping into your head for weeks finally spills out loud. Why can't I just shave it? Not, why am I allowed to grow a mustache? But why it feels like such a thing, a decision with weight, with tension, with psychological gravity far beyond a morning routine. And deeper still, you're asking, why do I feel weird letting it go? Welcome to the existential debate hiding inside every regulation trim. This isn't about rebellion anymore. This is about identity. And in the army? That's never a simple thing. You live in a culture built on uniformity, where everyone dresses the same, moves the same, salutes the same, and, at least in basic, even shaves the same. It's supposed to be that way. Uniformity equals order, discipline, predictability. But that creates a funny paradox. When everyone is identical, even a single variable, a mustache, a tattoo, a slightly unusual haircut, becomes amplified. It becomes you. And letting go of that one detail? It feels like becoming invisible. You've heard it before. It's just hair. Stop being dramatic. Nobody cares. But they're wrong. People do care. Because that mustache, thin or thick, ragged or precise, is often the only sanctioned, visible piece of personality you're allowed to carry in the field. And you're not the only one who's felt this. Not by a long shot. One guy in your company told you he felt like he lost rank when he shaved his mustache, like people took him less seriously without it. Another guy, a corporal, claimed shaving made him look too young, and that meant constantly trying to reassert himself in front of new recruits. He wasn't just shaving hair. He was shaving authority. Historians still argue whether military grooming standards were ever about hygiene in the first place, or whether it was always about visibility, symbolism, and control. There's decent evidence that facial hair restrictions stemmed less from medical science and more from the desire to create an instantly legible, professional face. Clean-shaven equals trustworthy. Neatly mustached equals seniority. Anything outside those bounds? Suspicious. And then there's the way culture plays into it. You remember flipping through those old unit photos. The World War II bomber crews with immaculate pencil statues. The Cold War tank commanders with thunderous lip caterpillars. Even in those black and white stills, the mustache tells you something about them. Not rank. Not MOS. Just attitude. Life lived. Personality asserted. One fringe tidbit you heard from a retired sergeant major. In the early 90s, a psychological operations team tried to identify which facial hair styles civilians found most commanding. The winner? A neatly trimmed, medium-density mustache. Why? Because it said, serious, without saying, angry. It said, seasoned, without looking unapproachable. It's not in any official study, of course, but you believed it. Which brings you back to the mirror. You could shave it off. Plenty of guys do. Some because of new unit policies, some because of a new assignment, others because they just don't care anymore. And every time you see someone freshly clean-shaven after a long run with their mustache, you feel a jolt. Like something's missing. Like they're not them anymore. But the real kicker? Sometimes you see it in their eyes, too. You knew a sergeant who shaved before transferring units. His mustache was borderline iconic, had been with him through 2 deployments, a promotion, and a re-enlistment ceremony. But his new CO was a by-the-book type. Zero tolerance for anything that even suggested non-compliance. So the sergeant shaved. And after that? His jokes landed a little flatter. His salutes a little stiffer. He wasn't demoted. He wasn't scolded. He just dulled. It was like the mustache had been a pressure valve. A stress release. A silent reassurance that he was still in there, beneath the uniform. And now, he looked like everyone else. The funny thing is, some guys don't even want a mustache. They grow it because it's the only option. No beards allowed. No sideburns past the earlobe. You can't even have eccentric eyebrows without a raised command eyebrow right back at you. So a mustache becomes the default compromise. The one bit of bodily autonomy you get to keep. And shaving it feels like surrender. It's not always a crisis, though. Sometimes it's just a moment. You finish the deployment. You start dating someone new. You're trying to rebrand your image before a promotion board. Or you're just done with the daily upkeep. You lean into the mirror and think, today, I'm letting it go. And that's okay, too. Because maybe you're not erasing your identity, just evolving it. But still, when the blade makes that first clean swipe across your upper lip, it feels like more than just a trim. It feels like a goodbye. To a version of yourself that stood a little taller. Smirked a little wider. Felt a little sharper. You towel off, step back, and study the new face in the glass. Different. But still you. Until next time. You're leaning against the Humvee now, boots scuffed, vest unzipped, sipping from a half-warm bottle of electrolyte water while the sky above flickers with late afternoon sun. Your team's winding down. The mission's wrapped. Dust clings to your face. And beside you stands a new guy, fresh out of AIT, nervous, wide-eyed, with a trembling question on his lips. Hey, so, are we allowed to grow mustaches? You grin. Because in that moment, you're not just a soldier. You're a sage. A translator of arcane wisdom passed down lip to lip through the mysterious halls of AR 670-1. And maybe, for the first time, you say the thing you've been thinking for years. It's complicated. Because the truth is, mustache policy in the Army, like everything else, isn't really about hair. It's about image, command, control, and whether or not the Army is ready to loosen its grip on the very faces of its soldiers. You've heard the murmurs lately. Whispers in the briefing room. Quiet nods in uniform forums. Words like pilot programs, policy review, and even, gasp, modernization. Are they really thinking of relaxing grooming standards? Maybe. Possibly. At least enough to make room for the idea that facial hair doesn't equal failure. Historians still argue whether the modern Army's iron-fisted grooming codes are the last vestiges of Cold War posturing or a carefully engineered cultural anchorment to prevent chaos in a system designed for uniformity. But change? It's in the wind. You remember the 2020 push around religious accommodations, the slow acknowledgement that beards for Sikh and Muslim soldiers were not only allowed but overdue. That opened a door. Not wide, but enough to let a few whiskers slip through. And with it came questions. If we can allow beards for religious reasons, what about medical? What about morale? What about preference? These are not easy questions for an institution like the Army, where cohesion is king, where uniforms are sacred, where the appearance of order is order. But times change. People change. And more importantly, soldiers change. You've seen the shift already, especially among younger troops. Recruits who join the Army after growing up in a world where a beard means tech startup founder instead of unprofessional. Soldiers who understand that identity is more complex than hair length. They follow regs, yes, but they question them, too. And yet, the old guard holds tight. Not out of spite, but out of fear. Fear that too much grooming freedom will unravel the delicate balance of discipline. That if you allow mustaches to extend half an inch further, you'll wake up with a formation that looks like the cast of Duck Dynasty. That's the Army dilemma. Change one rule, and suddenly you're not just managing appearances. You're managing expectations. And expectations in uniform are everything. Still, there's a growing belief, unofficial of course, that the mustache might be the Army's quiet concession. A facial ceasefire. A truce between expression and order. You've heard of units that take pride in their legacy mustaches, a tradition passed down between generations of NCOs. The new platoon sergeant keeps his trim just like the guy before him. Same lines. Same attitude. Not written in any SOP, but honored like a unit coin. There's even a phrase floating around on newer posts. The new reg is confidence. Meaning, if you wear it right, within reg and with conviction, most leaders will let it fly. But the opposite is also true, wear it sloppy, and you'll be shaving before chow. You get it. You really do. Because whether or not the Army loosens its grip on facial hair, soldiers will always test the boundaries. It's not about wanting to look like a lumberjack. It's about wanting to feel human. Recognizable. Real. And maybe that's what the future of mustache policy will come down to, not a rebellion, not a revolution, just a quiet understanding that a half-inch of lip hair can mean the difference between burnout and belonging. You look around now, at the sergeant with the firehose mustache, the private with the ghost liner starter kit, the captain who shaves daily but still comments on a good regulation statch. You realize it's not really about loosening or tightening the rules. It's about trust. The Army is evolving. Slowly. Deliberately. With lots of memos and PowerPoints. But under all that, soldiers are shaping their identities, inch by inch, whisker by whisker. And mustaches? They're the first frontier. So when the new guy asks again, "Are we allowed to grow mustaches?" you answer not with a joke, but with the truth. Yeah. But you gotta earn it. And somewhere, deep in the folds of AR 670-1, a line of text sits unchanged. For now. Now close your eyes. Let the image fade, the polished boots, the pressurized razors, the sound of electric clippers humming in early morning barracks. Let the questions about symmetry, measurement, and manual paragraphs soften in the background. You're no longer inspecting your reflection in a foggy mirror. You're drifting away from all that now. The mustache, in all its curious, combed, rule-bound glory, is no longer something to stress over. It's just a memory now, one of many small battles you fought on the long road through discipline, duty, and self-discovery. A quiet act of defiance. A symbol of resilience. A sliver of identity held tight in a world of rules. You feel the warmth of a pillow now beneath your head, a cool current of air brushing your cheek like a passing breeze through an open barracks window. No more inspections. No more corners of mouths to worry about. Just the steady rhythm of breath, and the quiet knowledge that, for better or worse, you made your peace with the one detail of your uniform that wasn't stitched in thread. Let the paperwork fade. Let the memories of boot polish and mustache wax dissolve like mist. You're safe now. Still. Whole. Drifting deeper, with every breath. Good night, soldier.